what's the problem? Did you do this? No? Click.
Yep.
Call me back after you tried something.
Yep. Alright, we're going to get started here in a second. Getting the stream ready. Channel streamers. All right. So today is our final day of Sequelize. We're gonna do some review of the stuff we saw yesterday or not yesterday, Monday and Saturday, and then we're gonna add some new stuff. So we're gonna learn about how we can do joins with Sequelize and do associations between tables and stuff. So do people remember joins? Remember that inner join, outer join, and all that? Did we go over that very much?
One of the classes was 6 or 7.
Okay, well, we're going to learn about them again. The good news is I personally feel like from Sequelize it's a little easier to understand what's going on with these joins. You may not quite get how the queries are devised, but you'll see how the tables are built. You'll see how the keys are matched up, and then you can kind of retrofit the queries in, right? You can kind of figure out how they're supposed to work if you would like to. So understanding joins is probably one of the more complicated things when you're first learning relational database for sure. So we'll make sure to take our time when we get to that part. This is a Saturday class, but they actually gave us a time tracker for a weekday version of this class, amazingly enough. So I know the activities I'm supposed to spend a lot of time on. So quickly, let's go ahead and just walk through and do a review. So we learned some CRUD methods on Wednesday. Or Monday. I have no idea what's going on. We learned some CRUD methods on Monday, expanded upon our knowledge of creating and destroying data. So find one. What would we use find one for? To find one record. Correct. Good guess. Find all. What do we use find all for? To find all the records. And what if we wanted to limit find all to look for specific records, maybe with some constraint? Where? We can use a where. Exactly. So find one, find all, they both kind of have those same constraints as well. You could do a find one with a where if you wanted to find one with a specific ID or a specific name or some unique constraint. Obviously, if you do a find one on something that could return multiple results, you're just going to get one, which would most likely be the first one that comes back. May not be your desired results, but it's possible. Maybe it is. Maybe you just want the first one that comes back. That is a common thing to see. So there's another function we use called create. What does create do? An insert. Yes, it creates data. I feel like you guys aren't really jiving this whole review thing right now. There's an update function which updates records, and a destroy function which is the confusing one, right? Because it actually deletes records, not destroys them. So if we want to be pedantic about it. So the where, we talked about the where. We can use that to constrain our queries, constrain our updates and our destroys, right? For instance, you may not want to update everything. You may want to call an update and just update the items that have a name that starts with an A or something, right? In which case you need that where. Destroy, same thing. You may not want to delete every record, so you're going to want to use a where most likely to effectively delete. Yeah?
Ronaldo wants to go.
Rolando? Did you call him Ronaldo? Ronaldo?
I don't know. I said Ronaldo, like the soccer player.
Okay.
Ronaldo.
That's not his name. We've been in this for 16 weeks, Nor. Yeah, yeah.
It's because I have the Ronaldo jersey.
Easy mistake. We're just ribbing you, Nor. I don't want this to come back in my feedback. Nor is saying the entire class bullies him. Okay. Does anyone have any questions or anything specific about the last two classes we went over that you'd like a refresher on before we move on? I know it's kind of a lot. We moved pretty fast. Monday we got out early. There wasn't a whole lot of content, but we still moved fast through it, so it's possible you didn't quite understand everything, or there's something you were a little fuzzy on that you wanted a refresher with. Anyone? No? You don't count. You got in late. So, yeah, you get to. We'll skip you on this. I can't help you with handlebars. It has nothing to do with last week. I don't know anything about handlebars anymore. Okay. So, we're going to go over the first app that we're building today. Well, we're building one app again today. The difference today is that we're going to do it in 2 phases instead of like the one app that we go through all the phases with, right? We're going to actually have like these first 2 steps are the first phase, and then we're going to go, well, I guess it's 1 again. The difference is I'm not showing you the completed app now. I'm showing you like a halfway point that we're going to get to. That's what I was going for. We got there. So let me pull it up. Okay. So we've got this app. We're actually going to make a blog site today. And the blog site's obviously going to have blogs on it. So you're going to be able to create a post. You're going to be able to search for posts based off of category, right? So we're going to have all kinds of categories. So let's create one. We're going to call this I Am Sad. This is going to be a personal one. Sadness is bad. This is personal. Boom. So, I am sad is my post. You can see, I can see it here. I can filter by personal. It shows up. Product review. There's nothing there yet. So if I want to add a product review, Dyson vacuum. It was good. No, that's too cliche. I couldn't do that. So not only can I see all of the posts, I can filter them. You can see when there are no posts. I can edit them. And it reflects on my home page. I can refresh the page and all my posts are still there. I can delete them. Well, I don't care about that vacuum anymore. And you'll see that it is now gone officially from the database. So the first phase of this application is really going to have to do with the searches, creating, updating, destroying, those kinds of things. The second phase has to do with adding authors to the blog posts and being able to associate blog posts with specific authors. So we make it a little bit more complex. But for this first one, it's going to be very similar to what we did with the To-Do app in the last class. We're just going to expedite it a bit. So you're not going to get nearly as much time to build it, right? So for the first activity, we're going to be creating the post section of this, right? Create new blog post section. So that's activity 11 called post model. And you're going to be starting from scratch. So remember, you want to set up your configs to point to your server and your database. You want to run that schema.js or the schema SQL file they give you, and if they don't give you one, then you can create the schema yourself. And then we're gonna like set up the initial model and stuff like that, right? So if you have questions, ask us. Don't hesitate to ask us. I'll Slack out the instructions, and we'll go ahead and we'll get started on activity 11. There's also a bonus on this one too. So if you finish early, there's some extra stuff you can add to the app.
We're going to be updating the post, we're going to update the post. Update the post.
Sequelize model definition has a capital letter in front.
What?
So like in the previous examples and in the instructions it says to create a sequelize post model.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that they named their variables with a capital in front. Is that for a particular reason, or is it like a sequelize thing?
Usually when you have like an object or something you created, you can, well, if it's like a constructor, it's generally,
Oh, that's why, because it's technically constructed.
I think it's just a thing they do with Sequelize, really. It depends on your library, what you want to do, your naming conventions. You don't need to do it that way if you don't want
I
to.
just wasn't sure if it was like something else
I think
later
that's
down the
just
road.
Sequelize best practices. There might be more to the story that I'm not aware of. But...
Okay, now we're going to see the works. This is actually a view, so if we can get this, share the next one.
Okay, let's go ahead and go over this one.
Yeah.
So in this activity, really what we needed to do was create this model, right? That was the primary goal of the activity. Before we go over at Fist at 5, how are people feeling about this activity today? Justin, it's Fist at 5, not wiggly hand. Come on, man. We've done this for a while. It's 5 fingers, but kind of. Okay. All right, whatever. That could be 4 fingers or 3, but. All right. So yeah, I know Sequalizer's a lot of information to remember, so it's hard to kind of totally remember everything we have to do. You know, there's a lot going on. So this activity specifically, we just wanted to define that model, right? And we could easily validate this, which is nice because if you run it, you should see that table in your MySQL Workbench, that schema, and you should be able to validate it, right? So let's create it. So we can use const var whatever. We're gonna call it post, and remember we need to use the SQLized connection, and we're gonna define the table off of the connection, right? So we can just call it post. That's what it is. It'll pluralize it. So after you have that, the name of the table, you can give it the options for the fields. So there were 3. We needed a title, a body, and then a category. And all of them were strings. So the simple implementation is going to look like this. Data types. Right? And all 3 of them are going to have this. Oh, is it text?
Yeah.
Not body?
No. Body, yeah, body is body, but no, the string is.
Oh, there's a text one. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, look at that. I should have read the instructions. Yep, text. Okay. So theoretically, almost. Now the last thing we need to do, since this is a function, is we need to return this model, right? Now we can validate that this is working. I've already run an npm install, as you can see. If you need to, you can run the schema SQL from the command line like this if you just want to make sure that the schema's in. So now we have that. Verify that your config is set up. Yep, okay, so all of my default settings will work based off of what I have on my MySQL Workbench. So I should be able to run it. And you can see SQLize spits out a bunch of garbage right here. Tells you a little bit about what's going on. Drops the table if it exists. Drops the table if it exists. Creates it if it doesn't. It doesn't anymore because I have force true set in there. It should have defaulted to force true, right? And you can see the create statement. So if we go over here, we can go ahead and refresh all. I know this is kind of hard to see, but there's a post table. And the post table has columns, ID, title, body, category, created at, updated at. So some of them are made automatically from SQLize, created at, updated at, and ID, right? Which is nice. Kind of does that work for us. Oh, there we go. Sweet. Look at that. So this is what we end up with the first implementation, right? But there was a bonus to this. Before we move on to the bonus, any questions on what I just did? Any, lingering questions about why these things work? Why did we have to do text instead of the string? It's going to allow more characters? Right. So the string, as we've seen so far, always defaults to varchar 255. Which means we can allow max 255 characters in that field. If we're doing a blog post, odds are the body of the blog post is going to be pretty long, right? It's going to be more than 255 characters. That's really rather limiting. So the text data type is very similar to varchar, but it's unlimited. It says, hey, we'll let you put any number of text characters you want in there, and we'll handle how to store them properly on the MySQL side. It just gives MySQL a heads up that it's going to be a really big field, potentially, right? So that's why we need that. So the bonus. Okay. So the first thing we need to do in the bonus, let me stop that because we're going to rerun it. Flags to the title and body to prevent null values from being entered. So the first thing we need to do is change this data type. It needs to be changed to an object so we can specify more properties. So the data type lines up with the type property of this new definition, right? So this is the part that starts to get really confusing because we have this object now inside of our original table definition object that associates to that property. But remember, the column names, the properties, whatever you want to call them, they have different attributes, right? They have a ton of potential different attributes, and we want to specify them here in our JavaScript code rather than in MySQL. So the first one is we want to prevent null from being entered into the body and the title. So there's an allow blank property, and we set that to false. Null is no longer allowed in there. So again, we need to create the object form of the column, and we need to define the type text.
What's the difference between allow null and allow blank?
Allow blank doesn't let... Oh, is it allow null?
Yeah.
Oops, I'm thinking of a different one. My bad. We do not want to allow nulls. Is there even an allow blank property? I might have been thinking of something else. That is my fault. We would have found out as soon as I ran it and it said, what the hell are you talking about? So now we need to add a validation to the title so that it must be between 1 and 60 characters. Is it validation? Crap. I gotta look up the validators. Is it validate? Oh, look at that. You guys got my back. And I believe it's... I got it. Rolando, geez. Okay, so for validators that you want to add, now validators don't technically affect the table structure. Validators are in SQLize. So you got to create a validate property. And in the validate property, you have another object that has its own properties, right? And for this, we wanted to verify that we could only have between 1 and 160 characters in the title. So there's a property called len, L-E-N, with an array that takes the min value and then the max value.
Short for
So-
length.
Yeah, short for length.
Sorry, I said you decided to do that.
That's good. That's good. So the next one is the text field has to have a minimum 1 character. Right? And so to do that, we can use that same validate len, but just leave out the max value. We don't care what the max value is, but we care about the min value. So now the last one. We want to specify a default value of personal. Now, if this is correct, if I run my server again, it should run. It doesn't seem like there was any problems. I can go back to MySQL Workbench. Let me close this. I can refresh all. And in here, you'll notice that this one changed. This one added a not null. Okay, so technically the fields are not null when they are generated. So title was not null to begin with. But text is now not null, and it wasn't before. The other major difference you can see right here is this default personal, right? In the category. So that means when we create a record, if you don't supply something there, we're going to default it to personal. Now the other thing is those len validators, those are going to run from Sequelize when you go to create or update a record. That's when those are run. And so you'll get an error in code if you were trying to add a body that had 0 characters or a title that had 161 characters or something like that. You would actually see an error. Any questions on this that's going on right here? Nope. Cool. If that is the case, then we are going to do the next step, which is what I showed you at the beginning of class. We're going to add the rest of the CRUD routes for this application right here. So, activity 12, you're basically just going to be adding the API routes that are going to work with Sequelize. Update, destroy, find one, find all, create. Okay, so we're going to have the same model. We'll add upon that to make a more full-fledged application. Activity 12, let's go ahead and get started on it. Oh, by the way, you can work with others on this. So, if you get stuck. No, I said your voice could be annoying. I said the things you say are funny, but they could be annoying, so consider yourself lucky. There's a distinction there.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out that way.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. I was asking Jose that. He's busy. No, I'm not doing prayer. No, that's a good way. Yeah, that's where I'm going to try to do it on my own. Okay. Yes, bring it up to this. Wow. I was out, right? Good? Yeah. Any questions on anything, or you? Yeah, that is definitely helpful to look at activities. And don't be afraid to
That like just really good at having.
Yeah, well, a lot of times that's what comes down to, right, is remembering all the syntax and stuff. Above and Beyond, the band, they have a couple songs I like. I can't remember the name. You've heard them on Spotify, folks. They're pretty good if you're.
So with that, if I want to select just one of this category, I'm gonna use find all and where.
If you want to find one of the category, like you want to just get one record.
No, I want to have all the records of one category. So find all where. That's not what.
Is your category that's coming in the same as the category that's coming in? That's the thing on JavaScript. I forgot to ask Roland and Andy, are you guys doing okay? You have any questions about anything?
Yeah, when we do this one, create, do we want to do all of that, or we just take them? When we make a post, we don't do them all, right?
Well, you have to do post every time, right?
Right. I just want to make sure we have to, because it just doesn't specify if it wants us to do anything that's the title of the category. It just says
Yeah, you want to say all of the input.
I'm doing alright. I'm kind of like using further, because I noticed that kind of building those areas.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like, what's confusion for help?
That's okay. And also don't use Mondays.
Yeah.
Would it be params or bodies for the other issues outside of?
Well, the one thing for that's probably good for
They are all going to be robotic, correct? Because it's JSON focused. There's nothing, the params, remember, comes from the URL. So like in that case, you
Right,
can
okay.
reference the ID.
Oh, right, okay, yeah. That's what I got.
I want to be here.
Let me know when you get to that point.
3 or 4 minutes, we'll let you know where we're at.
I don't know what day does. But I don't like to think about it. Dude, we got a loosely. We should start leaving that in
Yeah, that's the point of that.
I know.
So who eat shit? I heard that. Oh my god, that's awful.
Wait, be the guy who sneaks in up the stairs and says something wrong later. Then I can money flowers. Look, he's off the troublemaker. I can.
I'm just letting you know that.
Alright, so Matthew, ready? So it's TV and not those.
Did you accidentally summon me?
Yes.
Oh, wait, Siri.
Who runs bar in town? Master Blaster.
So then, when we go to update, like we did create, we have to take in all of it.
Yep, you do.
Did anybody else get an error? Want to try to make a poke? So you got it to send it?
No, I still haven't.
So when you hit that button, what does it say?
Doesn't it?
Unhandled rejection, supervised validation error, not null violation, post.body cannot be null. But like,
But it's telling you that in the
I don't know why it's saying there's stuff in the whole body somewhere, or I just spelled it. Oh. Yeah, plus stuff body. Plus stuff body.
You know,
Jesus Christ, I kept blocking them, and there were more and more different numbers.
This is Doug Deuce. Just making sure you vote today. Thanks, Doug.
How do I stop syncing forgiveness so that it doesn't drop I was looking at the
Okay, how's everyone feeling about this activity? You guys figured it out? You weren't on the... Good, great. How about you guys? You're all good? Everyone over here got it? Making our way through it? How about you guys over here? Okay, your update blows up, but we're close, right? As a whole, we're fairly close. Okay, well, we're going to go over this activity. We actually are ahead of schedule, so if people want to work on this for a little bit longer, they can. So it's kind of up to you. If you guys want to spend 5 more minutes, we can do that. Or if you'd rather we go over it together, walk through it, and then move on to the next activities and spend more time on those. Because those have to do with the joins and stuff. And I think those are pretty important in my opinion, and they're a lot harder. So,
If the next one is harder, go over this.
I think it is. I would say it is. Just because comprehending how joins work and all that is pretty tough as is. Okay, so this activity, we really just had to focus on this file, right? So we have our model already. They gave it to you in this post.js, how we defined it in the last activity, right? Well, I guess this is different right here, the title, but what can you do? Anyway, what we needed to do was add the basic CRUD routines for this model, this post model, right? So we're gonna have a find all, we're gonna have a find all with a where, a find all open potentially, our creates, a find one. So why don't we go through it together, step by step. So right here we have our API post, and this is a GET request, right? GET. So that means we're just gonna be getting posts since there's no URL parameters, right? We're not going to have any sort of where. We can't do a where. We have nothing to where on because the get won't have a body or anything like that. So we can deduce that this one's going to be a find all. Obviously, it says too in the comments it's a find all. So what do we got to do? We have our DB required already. That's the first thing you would need if they didn't give it to us. But you need to reference your table. So we have our table post. That's the model that we created in that post.js, right? Post. Ooh, post. Right there. So right here, post. And we need to call the what query? Find all. And we can call it with an open object here. Has anyone run this without the open object? See what happens? Nope. Nope. I don't know. I was asking. It'll either blow up or it'll just work the exact same. Okay, so remember when we call these queries, we need to call a dot then because they're asynchronous, so they don't happen right away. We pass in our callback function, and we'll get some posts back. Still works without the object. I figured as much. You would think that they would prepare for that, but and then once we have our posts, we can just do a res.json with the posts. Right. Any questions on define all?
Oh, the line A,
What?
no, no.
Are you just trying to be? You're just trying to catch me off guard?
No, no, not you.
You throwing me under the bus, Adam?
Not you. Line A, it's a to-do model.
Oh, good catch. I would have never caught that.
It's not important. It's just
It is important. Speaking of copy and paste, let's copy that at one and paste it. Now we got to find by category, right? So we're going to have to make this a little bit more complex. What do we got to change? We have to pass it a where in the object. Where? And this is going to be what? An object. Now what is it going to be, Rolando? Category rec.params.category. Right? How do we know that this is a category? Because what? It's in the route. Right. It's in the route. So, anything specified with that colon in the route is going to be in our rec.params object. So now we're basically saying find all the posts where the category equals the category we're searching for. And then we can just go ahead and return them. Nice. Now we're going to look for a specific post. So we can start here, but this probably isn't going to be where we want to end. Now the difference is we're looking for a specific post because we're looking by ID. So we're going to want to change this to find a single post. What do we use? What function? Find one. And then we're also going to need a where again, right? Because we need to search by ID. Params.id. And boom, this will bring back one single post. So I can edit that. Boom. Bring back our post and we're good. We've got our post. So, moving on. Is everyone good on these three? We know how to query for multiples or individuals. Siri, how do I query for multiple? Is she gonna answer?
Here's what I found on the web for how do I vary.
All right, we sure. Okay, so now we got to create with our post route. Create a new post. So what I would recommend if you're running through the code trying to figure out how this works is to console.log your rec.body right here. Because you want to see exactly what's being passed in from the UI so you can match it properly and all that fun stuff. Now, if you were building both the UI and the backend, I would recommend you define these rules from the backend first and then make sure your UI is sending the right stuff in, right? Because the server is kind of the source of truth. They should be defining these things. But we're working with an already defined UI, so you got to do what you got to do. So we need our DB post again. We're going to call the create function. We have three properties. Title, which is going to be rec.body.title. We have two more, and I'm going to cheat and get the body and the category. So rec.body.body to bring the body out, and rec.body.category to bring the category out. Then we're going to have another .then. And if everything was successful, we'll do a res.json and send back our post. One thing I want to highlight to you all is when I'm doing the .then, notice that it is on a new line and it is indented in 1 from the original function. So you could do your .then like that, or you could put it on a new line You could also do your dot then indented in the same place as your original function, or you can indent it in one. What this does right here with the new line and indent makes it a little bit more obvious where this dot then is happening, and it kind of separates a little bit from the original function so you can follow it a little easier. Just a tip for when you're formatting your code. Any questions on this post? Just create. Now, another thing we can do, we know for a fact that the properties coming in the rect body are exactly the same as those we need to create, so you can do that instead. What this is called an object spread. What it does is it's functionally equivalent to these three lines right here. It says, give me the title, the body, and the category, and copy them into the new object. It just takes everything that it has and moves it into the other object. So if you have nested objects, it doesn't copy them like this. It just takes that object to move it over. So they both still have the same object. So you can change it from both places, but it's a shallow clone is what they call it, shallow copy. So it only brings the first level items over. But it brings all of those properties. So when you have something like this that's a title, body, category, doesn't have any nested objects, it's real easy because you're just taking the title, body, and category and copying them over to this new empty curly brace object. So that's another way you can do this. I'll show you a third way you could potentially do this in a moment.
What's it called? Spread?
This is an object spread. Yeah, when you have the three dots like that, it's called a spread. There's array spreads as well that work very similar. Alright, so in this case we want to delete. So the delete, and I pasted this because I want to get done with this activity so we can move on. With the delete, we're actually going to call the destroy function off of the model. Instead of delete, we need a where as well. If we don't have that where, what's going to happen? We're going to destroy everything we need. And that'd be terrible. We don't want to do that. I think if we had this as a production app and our clients went to delete a single post and deleted all of them on the entire website, people would be mad. Can you imagine Medium? You go to delete your post from Medium, you delete everything. That'd be sweet, right? Whoops, someone made an oopsie. Anyway, the destroy here is very similar to like our find all or even our find one, except you call destroy instead, and instead of bringing you stuff, it destroys it. So it's similar in terms of the interface you're using. What it actually does is obviously different. And again, we have this ID here because our route specifies with that colon that there's going to be an ID. So for the put, this is our update. This is the last one. db.post update, right? So the first object is going to be our rec.body, right? Because of the changes that are already happening in our request, they're mapped one-to-one with the properties that are going to need to be updated, right? So title, body, category, they're all going to be in this. The other way you could do this instead of doing the spread is just pass in the object itself. That is also a valid way of writing this function. Then we need a where. We need to know what we're updating. And then we can do our then so those are the multiple ways that you can manipulate objects with JavaScript when you need to use them in another function. Now, what's safer? Passing in just the rec body or doing the spread? Well, it depends on what you consider safe. I would prefer the spread because what it does is it copies those values over so you can't change them on the original object, right? So if I change the values, I'm not changing the rec.body. So the spread's a little bit more preferable. But with the spread, be forewarned, it won't work in the browser necessarily. We'll get to that later. I think it works in Chrome, so if you're just using Chrome, it'll probably work. But then you go to Firefox and it doesn't, and you're like, whoa, that's crazy. So be careful with that. Node has a lot of features that aren't necessarily in the browsers yet. So you need to be wary about features like that. I'm showing you anyway because you can use it and it's a nice feature. We'll get to it eventually when we get to the ES6 stuff after Project 2. But it's there.
Is the spread always going to be triple dot?
Yes.
That's
Always triple dots. It's good. That's a good point. Yeah, it's always triple dots. Same with if you do an array spread or a variable arguments or something. It's always triple dots. That's just the operator. Any questions on this at all? Everything we did here to write all these routes out? Cool. Stephanie or Chris will Slack out the solution to this and the last one if they haven't done that one yet. So you guys can take a look at it later if you'd like. Otherwise, we are going to go ahead and move on. So, let me show you the final app we're going to be working on. I want to go over the functionality a little bit, how it's different than what we've just seen. Okay. So we created the original blog one, but now it's slightly different. You'll notice that I can't just create a post necessarily. There's not just posts here, but there's this new button, Manage Authors. There's no search by category. If I go to New Post, it actually redirects me to this authors page and says you must create an author before you can create a post. So now I gotta have an author, okay? Testy McTestface, that's our author. I'll make another one too. It can be Carson Howard. How do I spell your last name?
M-U-S-T-A-F-A.
M-U-S-T-A-F-A? Mustafa.
In parentheses, 19.
Okay, great. Okay, so now I can go to the blog. There's no post, but I can create a new post. This time, I specify the title, the body, and then the author. Create it. And now I can see the blogs, all the potential blogs written by specific authors, right? So we create a new post. Here we go. Now you can see there's two different authors, right? And I can even go to the Manage Authors, and I can go to my specific posts for mine, right? Right here, we can delete an author. They got no posts. Don't worry about it. Go back to the blog. We're good. So, what does this data look like behind the scenes? How is this different? Well, why don't we look at it? If I query the author's endpoint, you'll notice a couple of things. One, it brings back information about the individual authors, but it also brings back their posts. And you can see it's referencing posts with a 0 there. So this is actually an array of posts on the author. So it's an array of authors with an array of posts. If I go back, if I go to Testy McTestface's posts, create a new post. It's 2. I can actually go again to the API/authors, and you'll see now Testy McTestface has 2 posts. To that effect, I can actually go to the posts endpoint, and I get the posts with their author. So I have 3 posts, and their author is attached. So already what we can see here is there's a relationship between the two, right? Every post has an author. Every author could have one to many posts. They can have 0 posts, doesn't matter. There's an author. But every post has to have an author. Another curious thing. So why don't I open up my database? Close that. Let me refresh this. One, you'll see now I have a posts and an authors table over here. Oops. Select star from blogger.posts. So if I run both of these result sets, you can see right here I have my posts. Right here I have my authors, right? If I go back to, let me go back to my blog site. Go back here. If I go to manage authors, if I delete Testy McTestface, and I go back to posts, so remember, right here we should expect to see one author. It's great, but what happens to the posts? They're also gone. Only my posts remain. So that relationship is further strengthened by showing that in the database, when I remove an author, the posts are also removed. And that's not because the code is saying, oh, when you remove the author, also delete all the posts associated with them. That's because there's literally constraints added into the database let's see. Oops, that is not the button I meant to press. I have no idea what I just did. Holy crap. What is this screen?
Oh, at the top, you have a little expert.
Oh, there we go. Nice. Okay, so let me lower this. So, what do we got? These are the posts. These ones are important, right? Well, we have an author ID property, which is just an int, default null. But then we have this key, which references our property. This is actually a secondary index, right? So we have a primary key. So this is saying the name of the key is author ID, and it has the author ID column in it. Why would we index it? Well, again, if you remember briefly, indexes, that's just to make lookups faster and joins faster. But then we have this constraint, posts IBFK1 foreign key author ID. So this is saying there's a foreign key on the author ID that references the authors table and the ID field in the authors table. So what it's saying is for every author there's going to be an ID. That's the primary key, right? An auto increment integer. We add one every time we add a new author. It's saying in the authors table, that ID field, match that with the author ID in this table, right? And that's basically going to say, if I have an author ID here, it's going to match one of those authors in that table. And if I delete the author in that original table, it's also going to delete this. Cascade delete, right? Delete cascade. Update cascade. If for some reason something changes and the authors table needs to change here, it will. So these are the extra constraints that SQLize are going to add to create that relationship in the database. It's an actual relationship, and that's where relational database management system comes from. There's a real relationship in the database that it can enforce. So the semantics of all this aren't super important. You're not going to have to add foreign keys manually in the database yourself, but understanding that there are relationships that exist, so the parent table can actually have legitimate child records, and those records can be affected by stuff that happens on the parent table. That's an important thing to understand. Okay, so Fistify on relationships. Now, I don't expect you to understand everything about them, but how do you feel about that concept? The parent-child relationship, or at least that there are database-enforced relationships. Okay. Mixed signals. Yeah, it's very complex. We're going to spend a little bit of time kind of going over them. So what I want you to do is with the people around you, you're going to discuss this webpage, okay? And I will Slack it out to you. You're not going to have access to it. You might. I'll Slack it out. Someone can test to see if they can actually open this. Sweet. I'm going to send out some questions. I want you to spend a few minutes answering these questions with the people around you. Yeah.
Say that you showed us where you place and go to, but then you showed us if you place and go to, then why is it where
That has to be in its own deployment somewhere. So Heroku is a plugin called JawsDB. You can use that, and it'll actually host the MySQL database for you.
but you they need to listen to that.
Yeah, so you need to know the IP address of that server.
Is there also a password you can get on?
Mm-hmm. They'll usually set it up, or they'll give you one.
That makes sense. So they're like specifically host MySQL databases.
Just databases in general. Amazon does it. Yeah, you can do that. Azure can probably do it too. Google Cloud Services could probably do it. Heroku. You could do it on a Droplet with Ocean, or get your own VM with Linode or something to do there. Lots of them. Those are just some of the bigger ones. There's even more options out there than that.
So before people used to have their own servers and just
Yes. A lot of people still do it. It's just so much cheaper now. It's called infrastructure as a service. It's so much cheaper now to buy the infrastructure, rent the infrastructure. Well, cloud just basically means there's a server somewhere that you don't own or you don't actually host. This might even be that. Is that when it was first created? Because it didn't take off until like years after that. Yeah.
Is there a nice level for this?
Very fast.
Is there a reason why we only use VS Code and some other programs out there? Because I didn't know that.
Probably because they just chose it as their preferred. I think it's the best one for this kind of stuff.
Is there like Atom?
Atom is one. Sublime is another big one. Those are the big three. And
I was like, I didn't know there were like more things.
yep, there's a lot. There's hundreds.
Watch like a bunch of tutorials. Like, wait, what are they using?
Yep, there's hundreds of them. Vim, that's one.
I heard of it.
Okay, let's discuss this a little bit. So, who can tell me what we have to do if we want to create a relationship between these two tables? Anyone? Anyone? Yeah. So we'll need to have some relationship or some way to refer back to the author, right?
Yes.
So if we put the author ID here, that's a good start. Because then we could manually inject the author ID of the author who created the post. But we can do more, right? We can create potentially foreign keys, right? And so like I was just showing you, you could create a foreign key association between them and actually have the database manage it. But the first and the simplest way to create this relationship is have another integer column on here called author ID that references the ID of the author from the author's table. Any other ideas of how you could do it? Because that's not the only way. That's the way we're going to focus on today. But you could do some other stuff, maybe. Anyone have any other ideas of how you might be able to restructure this? What if you had one table that had all of the information in it, and you just had a new row for every author and post? You could do that. It's denormalizing the data. It's not technically space efficient, but it could be query efficient depending on how much data was in there, right? Because you're only grabbing information from one table. So that's probably not the ideal for this, because you're only going to have one author and several posts related to that author, but you could do it, right? So, relationships, dealing with database relationships and associations. The fact that you can take two tables and associate data between them and kind of build this relationship is a very important thing in databases. We're going to throw that out the window completely with MongoDB, but it's important in relational databases, SQL-based databases, or traditional SQL-based databases, right? So SQL Server, Postgres, MySQL, Oracle, whatever you deal with, you're going to have to deal with these relationships. You're going to see them. Almost all of you will see these in your jobs that you get after this class. Well, these relational databases more than you'd see something like Mongo. Any other questions on this stuff? Cool. Let's take a break. Come back at 8:10. 8:10.
Anybody really good with handlebars? That doesn't need to take a break?
I like how you said that, and everyone went, "Oh God."
Yeah. So my homework somewhere along the line, my theory doesn't pass the correct data to the ORM.
Alright, that's okay.
What about you?
I'll let Andy get out. Sorry. No, you're good, man. Take your time.
I 101, almost at 101 and then.
Doesn't get whether, like, where it's supposed to set the value to. So we're updating. So it's finding, it finds that we're clicking to valid, it just doesn't set the value equal to 1. And I think I was because it finds the ID, and I think my issue is in the views actually. In here somewhere, I'm not passing the data correctly from the HTML to the query.
Console log is
Oh,
the valid.
data is defined.
Console log is the valid state. The problem is not coming back from the database. Maybe the type of you get. That comes out from the that comes out from the UI.
So it's not going to set that you have known it properly. Now let's go back to where it's coming from. Which one you get with it. So he's getting everything that it's going to get request.
These were my seeds. So like I haven't actually been able to change the dailies at all.
Alright, so let's see the equate ball of zero.
Like it actually displays them correctly. Like these are valued at 0 and these are valued at 1. So it loads them correctly.
It's devour, it's devour.
You're not going to do so.
Okay.
That's like passing this data. Let's see what about this one.
That's the text. But you pay attention because that's what I can do. You're saying that these events are to devour.
Oh,
Make sure you don't do that. So that should take care of what data's wanted.
okay. Yeah, I just didn't think about it clicking more than one button. I was just trying to be like, oh yeah, if you click this button, whatever.
Yeah.
Good.
No.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I just kind of does stuff. Oof, no. I've just seen the word devour so much. I don't want to ever spell this word again.
Devour what?
What am I doing? It's like between the first and the 20th devour, you get lost at where you're passing around data. And now the button doesn't work because I changed it. I took off the ID. I didn't change it in the okay, well it is returning the data now. Update order set devour equals 0 or ID equals 2.
So it's working?
Yes. Now. now it's assigning the wrong value. It's setting it to false instead of true. So it didn't change the state itself, it just reassigned the same state it had.
Are you verifying that it's a Boolean value that's coming into the database?
Yes.
Company needs them. So they, I mean, I can't really answer that for you.
I know a lot like my broken down.
So my foot is
something similar to that.
Probably, yeah. So, like the U-Haul, for example, like websites, right? So they're dedicated to all either handle the site or figure out any issues on the site, or maybe they'll do a reservation by seeing like agents or the user things. So yes, all do both. I mean, if the company wants from you, kind of job in, you know, yeah. So you're gonna get that sense that you're going to because you asked that question. What exactly? Database, so database like a job, probably not. Someone else. You'll probably work with a database. You'll probably work in an application, not some will be web, some won't.
Yeah.
Very appealing. A lot.
That they just all the time.
Thanks for giving me the whole table.
No problem.
It's like that.
That's not the double punishment.
Jose's attention. Jose was minding his own business, going to the BS mode and selling keywords. No. I know, it's like at work. I hear females talking like, let me pick up this trash you talked before.
Every day. Hey, that's
More.
Let me walk by and pretend like I don't know.
So yeah, it's, when I got the grant,
Okay, let's move along. Get through class. So, before break, so we all remember, I'm sure, we talked a little bit about database relationships. So, we're going to be moving into an activity that creates these relationships for us. And really, there's not a whole lot that the instructions tell me to even tell you. They're like, oh, mention these things. But I at least wanted to show you a code snippet before you start. Otherwise, it's going to be very hard to finish. So for one, I recommend you definitely use the docs. Use the Sequelize docs. Read through the information about relationships, one-to-many joins, one-to-one joins, and stuff like that. You're going to need it. It's very helpful. But how can we define a relationship in Sequelize? There's a couple of ways. The two we're going to use potentially today, you only need one, but you could use two, will be the belongs to or the has many. So a post belongs to an author, right? An author has many posts. So this example here uses belongs to. So for instance, a user has many tasks, or a task belongs to a user. And what that does is creates the relevant fields in the tables based off of that ordering, right? So if a task belongs to a user, what it's going to say is the task needs a foreign key relationship to the user, right? And then you can specify things like, oh, on delete I want a cascade, or the foreign key should or should not be null, right? If you have a relationship from task to user where tasks have a foreign key to user, meaning they have some relationship to a master user record, you can specify if you want that relationship to be nullable or not, meaning does it have to have a user related to it? Can it just be a one-off task that anyone can pick up? Maybe the user relationship means a user has been assigned to it, but the task can still exist unassigned, right? For the relationships we're doing today, there's none of that nullable stuff, right? A post cannot exist unless there's an author. You can't just have a post, right? You need an author. But belongs to is a way that we can do it, right? So in our case, a post belongs to an author. Also notice that there's this new function associate related to the table right here. So that is something you have to think about too. You need this associate function so that after you've created all of your models, Sequelize can know what tables to associate. Okay, so this snippet will be in the instructions. You can look at it more, refer to it later. But with that in mind, we're going to jump to activity 13 where we start defining these associations between our models. So you're going to go ahead and start on that activity. Remember, use the documentation for Sequelize. You definitely want to get good at reading through docs, finding the things you need, figuring out how to use them, right? It's hard. Docs are often not written very well. So, you know, it's a challenge, but it's a skill in and of itself, learning how to read docs, and a good one at that. So let's go ahead and do activity 13. Give you some time to work on that, and then we'll go over it.
split screen if you want.
What?
Use a split screen.
You have the link.
I'm just helping others.
There's the third party I blame my client.
I sacrifice my body. Again.
Third person.
Then are you happy?
Everyone's happy? You're welcome.
There's another thing.
Was me. I just, yeah, I typed my name. Because I wrote it.
So long, it keeps going. Okay, it's just type I was passing that as a species state, the request got on the state travel instead of just one. Instead of saying, hey, now it is going to be set to one to make it. I was just like, okay, just take what you have and do it again.
Nice.
So they actually very like you got host, you got a code, it's more written, you get close to that. So
select yeah. So either author or oh, so you have to do no. Just do the table. You have to get rid of that top and just say create media. So use one of those lines.
today, because they're the last that we will analyze. Usually we got 600. So we kind of like San Francisco. You can go like 3 hours, 4 hours. So they're not there for us.
Go back to normal versus.
Zika? What?
I found a mosquito on my
You're gonna get Zika in Arizona.
I don't know, there's a lot of small mosquitoes. Anyway, so I got the bird zapper. For 3 days, nothing changed for the shit.
Yeah, because there's like not a lot of mosquitoes out here, dude.
I saw like 2 mosquitoes. I don't know.
Okay, first, it's too cold for mosquitoes around. Second, don't leave any sitting water in your backyard or outside. You have like pots, turn over, trash cans, turn over, nothing that you collect water.
So I'm gonna get like a small shit.
Yes, I know. Yes, I know. This is propane and smoke in your yard. My dad has one. Why just buy a candle? How big's your yard?
But you know citronella is
Yes, I know what citronella is. Yeah, I mean, yes, I know what citronella is. I know what that machine does. Oh, is it kerosene?
I'll come back because I don't ever.
Wait, what's kerosene? Oh.
Anyway, we'll get a bunch of candles.
How you guys doing? The activity good? Is everyone done? Is anyone not done? Who's not done? You're not done or you're done? You're done? You guys aren't done? How much more time do you think you need? Are you guys all done back there? I only saw 2 of you. 2 of you said yes, so I guess I'll just round up.
Yeah, but we're sitting next to somebody who did one, so it's okay.
Yeah. Okay, well, why don't we go over it then? There's a lot of chatter in the class, and whenever there starts to be a lot of chatter, it's not really productive to let you continue to chatter, I guess. What was that? Yeah, this kid in his citronella conversation gets the whole class riled up. Thanks, Noah. God.
Mosquito.
Oh, that's right. It was Zika. That's what it's like.
Wait a second, Nora's pregnant?
Okay, so we needed to define relationships between our post and our author, right? So they gave us 2 models in this unsolved version. The author model, right, which just has a name right now, and the post, which is the same model we've been using so far, okay? So there's 2 ways you can do it. We're going to start with the belongs to way. So if you decide that you want to start from the post and say a post belongs to an author, you most definitely can. And how do we do that? Well, if you follow this link, you might be able to see an example. You'll see that task example that I was showing you. We can do the same thing with the post. So the first thing you need is this associate function. And this associate function, again, is called by Sequelize after it's done generating all the models and before it writes to the database, and it says, okay, well, what tables are related? How do I have to build these relationships, okay? So in that associate function, you're going to get a models object that's going to represent all the available models. So again, there's 2 ways that we can do these associations. A belongs to and a has many, right? Well, does a post have many authors? It doesn't. So we want to do the belongs to, right? And in the models, we'll have a reference to the author, right? We'll be able to see that author model. So technically now our post belongs to the author. It's going to generate a foreign key and all that fun stuff. But what it's going to do is generate a foreign key that is nullable. Okay? We haven't cleaned up the fact that we always want an author to exist before a post exists. We cannot have a post without an author. So with that, you can specify the foreign key. You can tell it allow null, just like the types, false. This can't be null. You absolutely must have an author, right? And this association right here is going to create a foreign key on the post to the author. So you're going to get your author ID or whatever, right? Your authors table is unaffected. Yes?
Line 18, do we need the models in front of the post?
Do you need the models?
I put model dot post.
Function models.post. You want dot one.
Or you can do that without that.
What?
Because in the code now it says models dot post. You don't
Oh,
have a lot.
yeah, no. Well, we have a reference to the post here. You don't need to do models.post, right? So this is like your closures, remember? Your you know, we can have the functions. So you could do models.post if you wanted to, but no, you do not need to. Any other questions on this little associate function right here? This is a very powerful function, right? Well, what if we wanted to add this kind of information from the author? You can do that as well. You can actually do both at the same time. Oops, that is not what I meant to type. So author is also going to have an associate function. And in that associate function, it's going to be slightly different. Now the author has many posts, correct? And because it has many posts, if we were to just do this version, it would still create the foreign key on the post. Because the author has many posts, so that means the relationship goes from author to post, so the post needs to know about the author, not the other way around, right? Another thing we can do is specify that we want these posts to cascade delete. So when we delete an author, all of our posts are going away too. It's a very strong relationship you can build between the two tables, and it is extremely effective when your database can manage its data itself, right? You don't have to worry about the cleanup or anything, because more likely than not, you're going to miss something. So if you mix both of these, what you get is the ability, and this belongs to specify that your foreign key should exist, and that you can cascade delete. I'm fairly confident you can do all of that from either one, but this is how you could do it both ways, right? So specify from the author or specify from the post.
So cascade means delete from the
Cascade delete means if I delete an author and there are any posts that have a relationship back to that author ID, all of those are deleted as well. So this right here, if I do npm install, I run the server.js, you can actually see what it's building. So we're dropping all the tables. We're going to create the table authors, right? Has an ID, has a name, has the created updated at that we normally get. And then we're going to drop the posts, create the post table. Everything's good. Everything's the same as we've seen before, but now we have this author ID that's being created of type integer. And then it also creates this foreign key, which references the authors table, ID column, delete cascade. So it added this line and this field because we've specified those relationships. That's what we get from these. So now we have the safety of knowing when we delete an author, our posts are gone too. And we can specify, we can find what author our post came from because we have that hard relationship between the two, right? If we didn't have that hard relationship, it could kind of be up to whatever. Either you have to figure it out somehow, or maybe you have an author ID field that is supposed to represent the author, but you don't have a hard relationship between the two. There's no guarantee that's actually true, right? It's very possible someone could accidentally put the wrong author ID in, and maybe one that doesn't even exist, and that's no good. So any questions on this? How any of this works? Why you'd want to do it? Relationships in general?
How important is SQLize in the actual real world?
How important is SQLize in the real world? Not important. So SQLize is very helpful. Obviously, we've seen that, right? It's demonstrated benefit. I do not know how many people use it in the real world.
I haven't seen it in any job post.
This kind of thing they usually won't mention. They're not going to be like, yeah, you need to know SQLize. Like, they might put it as a bonus somewhere, but odds are they're not going to mention it because this is just some library that you use. They could use it in half their apps, maybe, right? Depends.
Utilize me for 104,000 downloads on NPM per week.
Per week. So,
So it's NPM. Tell you how many nodes.
Millions.
So maybe it's just like a tool to like help you out more easier or more efficiently.
Maybe it's used in like Canada.
it makes your job easier, yeah. It does make it easier to some extent. It makes you more productive up front, for sure.
React is 1.3 million.
So Sequelize at 104,000, right? That's a lot. That's still a lot. That's not...
That's just boot camp
That's pretty much. Express gets 2.56 million a week. So
If you look at a library like Lodash, look at Lodash. It's like 20 million a week. It's crazy. Different library, though, for a different purpose altogether. Because you got to look at Sequelize in general, right? Are they going to be using a relational database? If they're not, rule it out. It's gone. Are they going to be using MySQL, Postgres, or SQL Server, or Oracle? They could not even be using those. They could be using DB2 or MemSQL or some crazy version that people don't use. Okay, now rule those guys out. So the odds of them using MySQL and a Node environment, right, and all of this stuff, and then saying we also need an ORM, there's not very likely in general. So Sequelize is being used a lot. It's just not for everyone at all. So is it used a lot? Yeah, it is. 104,000 a week is a lot. That's significantly more than most packages. But it's not React or anything where it's pretty ubiquitous, right? You can use it everywhere. You can use Lodash in literally every JavaScript project. So why wouldn't you? It's extremely helpful. Makes sense why there's 20 million downloads a week.
Have you heard of MooTools?
MooTools? No.
Okay, I was told that it was like very similar to the jQuery, but jQuery went out. And MooTools has
Well, if it's similar to jQuery, though, again, different usages, all kinds of stuff. It's hard to say how many people actually use it. It's used. It is. But the thing is, ORMs as a whole are used a lot. You're going to run into ORMs. Sequelize alone, I don't know. I'm going to say it's used quite frequently in terms of Node ORMs. But Node in general is a funky environment. So it's really hard to track this kind of stuff down. Like I will tell you, in like the .NET world, there's a similar one called Entity Framework. Almost everyone uses it to some extent, even if they don't use it completely. Like, it's pretty ubiquitous. And so that one you will see on job postings. You should know a little bit about it because it's used so frequently. And it's so integral to the .NET environment, where Sequelize isn't quite like that. In Node, it's not integral to it. Like most of the Node applications, there's not, like this is what a Node application usually looks like. But in .NET, the .NET world or the Java world, you can pretty much guess what those apps are kind of going to look like. They're usually going to be these enterprise CRUD apps that have an ORM and lots of database tables behind them. In Node, it is no holds barred. It could be anything, right? So it's a different environment. This is a good question, though, because there's a lot about the environment of Node. So Sequelize, how important is it in the grand scheme of things? Not really that important, but what it does is helps make you more productive. It's a good exercise for understanding ORMs, how they work. It's a good exercise for going through a very complex library, learning how it works. Something you're going to have to do every day when you're a production level developer, right? So, and you've got that job. You're going to be doing this every day for more than one package. I mean, your first day in the job is going to be drinking from a fire hose, right? You're being blown away. It's going to be like some of our worst weeks. Not to scare you, but that's what it's going to be like. And you just got to be prepared for the reality of learning a lot all the time. That's just what the job is.
So are you still reading docs in your job?
Do I still? Yeah, I read docs all the time. It's very rare that I run into a library where I know everything about it. Even libraries I use every day, I still look at the docs. You know, I mean, there's just sometimes stuff you forget, even for libraries that you are familiar with. But yeah, Stephanie shook her head. Chris, when he starts doing this more and more and more, and he gets more into like the building the full apps and stuff and being on the team, he'll say the same thing. You know,
So in tech interviews, we're not expected to have all of this memorized.
absolutely not. Usually in a tech interview, if they have a specific technology that they do use often, like React, they might ask you React-specific questions, and they'll say that in their post. They'll say, "Hey, we use this tech. You should know about it," right? But generally in the technical interview, I would say more likely than not, it's going to be related to either some architecture, some specific language, or some process. That's what you're going to be need to know, especially as a junior coming in fresh. The requirements on what you should know are really kind of depends on the company. So it's hard to tell you. I can't even tell you what your interviews will really be like because it's so varying at this level specifically. So, any other questions on this stuff that we've been talking about before we move on to the next activity? No? Cool. We are going to jump then to activity 14, where you're going to add joins with these relationships. So joins, they're going to affect your queries, okay? But you're going to have to say, you know, hey, if I'm grabbing a post, I need all the authors as well. Or maybe I want to grab all the posts with this author ID, right? Something like that, and then grab the author information. So we're going to add joins. So that's activity number 15. Let's go ahead and start working on that. You have to do it on everything. From here on out, you're running npm install on every activity, so get used to it. Also, on this one, just like the last one, I'll stress you should use the docs a lot. The docs are literally in the instructions, so... You absolutely can.
It's like I'm tired of doing it every single time.
It's particularly bad because we have to do it every day, like 5 times.
Okay, we're going to the next one again.
But, you know, you're actually developing trust to do it once, maybe twice, so.
Just as long as I do npm control.
It's even longer. We got
Then you don't have to waste down, you just copy it over.
Doesn't make sense.
Right click, copy, right click,
That
right
sounds
under.
like a really good project for you right there.
I copy paste the module faster than npm install. Sounds like a
old Zoom video conference, I got
I wonder why no one's invented that.
Because of that, all these things fall.
Wait,
Down,
can we
let's
just
go.
type
Cut
NPM
that.
I?
Yeah, you can do npm I if you really want to save.
Yeah. It's all about efficiency, right? No, just I. NPM space I.
You should tell me that like
50 days ago.
How do you know your advanced programmer? You do npm I save.
Time is money, people.
Yeah. Did you see those articles I posted in the random channel about like gaming your code?
No.
I don't like
I
any-
shared it a few weeks ago. So, there's like an article.
I tried my best to make this easy to follow. That one, or
It was a Reddit post, Web Performance 101, how to optimize everything. Or, yeah, how to optimize your JavaScript, CSS, and like runs you through how to like min-max your code using less lines for compilation purposes and stuff like that. I think you talked about it one day in class, or maybe we might have on a Saturday, how like we should try to keep our code as clean as possible and minimal without blank spaces so that when it does compile, it's like quicker and better.
I mean, the compilation step takes those out.
Somebody said something about it, and then it's really strange that Reddit gave me this kind of marking that was relative to it.
Oh yeah, you're talking about like minification, where it takes all the spaces out for you.
I don't think Arthur was talking about like how to write your code more efficiently so that when it is run, it shapes out. It's like your coding practices, you know?
Why does this keep ending up over here? Why are you throwing this?
That's the problem.
Heat drops. People take it away from the oil and fill it, so it's able to.
I have mine in my hand. I'm using the
Stressed
stress.
out. Squeeze it in all the way.
I put it at the window and I stand it and I stick to it and and he's just walking. It's like a sign from above.
Yeah, so there's no more suspense anymore. It's like, nope, go ahead. Shit. Okay, you know, sort of that. Don't turn on until after you look at it.
This one is just study.
Yeah. Now that you say it, Charlie, I was like working on it, and then it was like, you know, I'm like, it's done, nothing on someone, I was gonna here I am. You're installing your puppy. Just basically one frustrated. I had a blast. Yeah, I know. This might be something. Yeah, it's not my favorite part.
So, you're thinking the same thing. I'm gonna tell you that you're like done typing. It's going to be okay.
I can grab it.
You can do it or
I thought about it, I was like, I could probably just go but one day you're like, hey, actually, what's going on? Sweet, there's a line. Like,
What?
I'm getting better at reading the message.
Good.
That's another step that's hard. So, okay, it doesn't look at position and position. This is going to have service hospital. So, if it doesn't work, add position.
Are you serious? I would do that.
And then because they don't want to the button, it's like add a chat to it. So they can all they said that because they didn't have a database, they realized that like the basically and so
While watching the money, of course.
totally.
I don't know what you guys are talking about, but we're gonna go over this next activity.
Talking about buddy chat. The next
Okay. All right. How are people feeling about relationships now? Not your personal relationships, but DB relationships. I tried. I try to be funny, but I'm just no Garrett, you know. So what can you do? Okay. So what did we have to add? Well, we needed to find a way that we could query stuff and get information about both the authors and the posts at the same time. And so there's a specific property of the query functions that you can use to get this information all at once, right? So for instance, we are getting all the authors. We have this API/authors endpoint. And we want to get all the authors and all of their posts. Well, there happens to be a nice property called include that takes an array of the child tables or the related tables that you want to bring back. So, for instance, we have an author, we want to get the posts. If we just include the DB post table, right, then we can get the author with all of their posts. So, I have this running. Let me pull this up. If we look at the output, you can see I have Carson Howard as an author, and then I have 3 posts. All of the information coming back, right? So that is represented right here in this code snippet. Just by adding the include, we get all of that extra information. Now what would that look like in SQL? Because I think that's important to look at as well. So this just grabs the author names and all the titles of their posts. But this is effectively, if we wanted to make it the exact same query, this is effectively what we're doing in SQLize with that include. Select everything from table A, which is an alias for the authors. Select everything from table P, which is just the blog posts. Make sure you join on the ID, right? So this is how that relationship manifests itself as a SQL query. We have the author ID and the post author ID. They have to be the same. Where they're the same, you can bring back all the records. And what I have are 5 records, 3 for Carson, 1 for Doug Ducey, and 1 for my other author. Now you'll notice there's actually only 4 posts here. This is what's interesting about it is I have all 5 authors, and it's kind of hard to see. Or I have all 3 authors, 5 records, but my second author here has no posts, so they just get null for everything. So we're still getting back the information about that author, but we're not getting any information about posts, and that's okay. That's what this left outer join does. So the same thing happens here in the JSON response. If we look back down at the very bottom, it's hard to see. We can see our second author, and their post is just an empty array. That's the SQL equivalent to what we just did with SQLize. So if we go to an individual author, the same thing applies, right? You just add that include with the table you want to include, and we should get that information back. So if I go to authors, I append an ID 1, I get me, Carson Howard, back and all of my posts. What does this look like in SQL? Now we've added that where clause, a.id equals 1. Now I get 3 records back. My author records and then my 3 different posts. That's the functional equivalent to what I just did here, which is the code that's represented here, right? You see? So my ID comes in, where ID, include all the posts, and then send the information back. So one thing I want to touch on here is also what SQLize is doing for us that we may not have totally realized yet. You'll notice that there are 3 records here, and all 3 records have information about the author, correct? But in SQLize, we're just getting 1 object back, 1 author, and 3 posts. So it's taking all the like information from those authors and turning them into just 1 object representation of it, so you don't get 3 authors that are the same thing. It builds that object structure for you. Again, here's the code. Any questions on what we've seen so far? What was that?
Oh, there was a box over.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the Telesend stuff brings up commit messages and stuff. It's really irritating. That one, yeah. You have a question? Yeah.
No, I said stupid Christian.
Oh, stupid Christian? Oh, okay. Alright. So,
will you be able to slack out the MySQL equivalent, or is that easy to find?
I can copy paste them. Yeah, I'll do that after class for you. That's a good idea. Okay, so let's look at it from the reverse. Let's look at it from the posts. Okay, we want to bring all of the authors back with their relevant posts. Well, we can do that as well. The same thing applies. You just add the include, and then the table you want to bring in is bring in also. Now you will notice that the structure changes a little bit because we're going to get one post with one author, one post with one author, and notice that the author is repeated because of the order that we're grabbing things, right? So we're grabbing all the individual posts. We want every post, and with every post we want information about its author. Well, we can't have like a reverse array, right? Where there's an array of items that all have the same thing. I mean, it could know from that to return just the author with all the posts, but that's not really what you asked for. In SQL, that is a different query, right? You asked for the posts, and we're giving you the author information too. So the functional equivalent to that would just be to switch authors and posts. That's it. And you've got the same query, right? So the results you get back aren't much different, but how we view it in JSON from Sequelize is different. Same here with the find one. Again, include the author, and with that one post, you'll get the author back. Any questions on how you can use include, relationships in MySQL, how you build them in Sequelize, anything we've gone over today or with Sequelize at all? This is the last Sequelize activity, right? We have no more Sequelize activities after this other than Project 2. We're going to have to use it. And in Project 2, you will have these SQL relationships. So it's important that you understand them. Because they're tough. So does anyone have any outstanding questions? Anything lingering that they want answered? Okay. So for starting Saturday is the official start of Project 2 week. So we have Saturday, then we have Monday off. Remember. So I won't see you guys till next Wednesday. So have a good weekend. What was that? Whoa. Just saying, it's a nice break. You know, it's been rough on all of us, right? You more than me, but, you know. Anyway, we're starting a Project 2, so you'll be working with your groups. Daniel's going to go over the requirements. You're going to have the same kind of like devising an idea, getting it approved. So Stephanie and Chris will approve your projects this time. Again, I feel like they did a great job last time, so I'm more than trust them to pick good ideas. Plus, it's not really my job to micromanage anyone. So, yeah, I don't know where I was going with that tangent. But they're the ones you need to look to for this, right? They're the ones who are giving you the final grade. They're really the ones you want to impress with this. It doesn't matter what I say to you. I'm just going to try to make you feel bad so that you have to work harder, right? That's my job here. Their job is, they're the ones that are actually the people that you need to impress, okay? So make sure they're cool with your ideas. Talk to them about it. Make sure they don't think it's too much work. So work with them on that. Otherwise, we're pretty much good. I'm going to slack out a video here on Sequelize and Handlebars that Trilogy has that you can go ahead and take a look at if you want more review. I will slack out the code snippets with their related SQL queries before I leave, and you guys are free to go. We'll have the solutions up after tomorrow. Stephanie slacked out all the solutions for today, so if you want to see them and review, yeah, that's it. That's all we got.